Hello, welcome to Automation Hour. So if you're joining us for the first time, all lines are muted, and we're going to ask you to post your questions here in the GoToWebinar. And we will be posting the recording as well as the link to the deck sometime after the session. So we are fully booked out through the end of July. So if you haven't registered, I encourage you to go to automationhour.com and register for these upcoming sessions. And I do want to call out the one on February 28th, where my other co-host, Rakesh, will be coming back to present. And if you have a business use case and a core process automation solution that you'd like to share with the community, direct message us and we will get you on in a future session. We can't bring this free webinar series to you without our sponsor, Concrete.io, so we want to thank you. And here are your co-hosts, myself, David, and Rakesh. This was from last year's Midwest Dreamin'. And with that, I'm very excited to have my co-host on here to present. So with that, I am going to hand it over to David.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. All right. 1 second. Apparently.
There you go.
All right. Sorry. The new Apple update got me. All right. So my name is David Litton. I am a director at Victorium Solutions. I'm in charge of Elevate and Boost. I live in Lakeside, Montana, a huge town of just over 2,000 people. I've got about 8 years of Salesforce experience and 19 Salesforce certifications, though I'm not yet a Trailhead Ranger, so got to work on that. I'm a user group leader here in Kalispell, Montana, as well as a Salesforce MVP. And some of my hobbies are photography, Chicago Cubs baseball, and Pearl Jam. All right, so for today, we're going to go over how did we get here, what is available today, demos, what do I think is coming next, and then go over some best practices of flow. So how did we get here? I'm not sure if anyone has used a classic URL button for flow. This is how I first got it started, and it was quite a wake-up call. You can mess up in so many more ways than you could or than you can now. Some of the things that you have to pay attention to is that it's case sensitive, there's no visible inputs, and it goes to a separate screen inside of Lightning. So if you are using any in Classic, it would open within the page. And Lightning, I think they just with the last release have now got it where it's opening up inside the page, but depending on what your settings are, it might still open up in a separate screen. But the text here I've got with the flow URL, you'll see that's what you actually have to paste into the button. All of the variables that you might be passing into your URL are static, and you've got to deal with the redirect URLs in there. Just lots of potential areas for failure, and if you're new to it, it can be a little discouraging sometimes. So it's a lot nicer nowadays. We also had classic Visualforce pages. So these could be placed on a quick action. You could also put them in mobile. However, they weren't really mobile friendly. So it was easy to do. You just had to update the flow interview name where I've got internal case comment there. You would just put in what your flow name is and you can drop it onto somewhere with that Visualforce. It just did not look very pretty and it left you wanting a little bit more. So with that, what is available today? How's this improved? Visual Flow has improved with additional locations to use flow. Um, not You're not restricted to just visual force pages or URL buttons. You can put it on a utility bar. You can put it in a Lightning component. You can put it on a Lightning page. You can put it inside of an action. So lots of new places that you can put a flow to get more out of it. There's also new input and field options for you. So previously, if you're thinking a few years ago of trying to build a flow and you wanted to validate an email or a phone number, there wasn't much help around that. You had to be pretty advanced with flow to do that. And now there's additional input fields for you that are out of the box. So Salesforce has added additional fields that really just make it able to be used in more scenarios. And then we've got Salesforce Labs. So this is one of the areas that's been most impressive to me. I'll cover 6 different Salesforce Lab apps that are out there today that you might find interesting. I know a few of them I use on a regular basis, and with those Salesforce Labs, you can really save a whole lot of time by not having to reinvent the wheel for some of the things that you'll use over and over. Then we've got flow components, and flow components are similar to the new input fields that Salesforce has given us. However, they're ones that people, either developers maybe at your company or developers in the community that have made them public. I'm going to go over the unofficial SF website for this, but there are ways for you to enhance what you're doing on your screen with custom components. And oftentimes there are things that you just install and you don't have to code, you just have to put the correct inputs in. And then flow actions, this is one of the coolest things. Countless times over the last 8 years or so of me getting comfortable with flow, everyone was always wondering, myself included, how can I redirect somebody to a newly created record in a very seamless way, or just any sort of dynamic redirect? And that was something that took a lot of code and never really worked properly because you had to have a stop screen before you could pass the variable out. So with that, it just made it pretty difficult to have a good user experience. But now with flow actions, we can do a whole lot more. All right, so flow display options, I've talked a little bit about these, but we'll go into this in a little bit more detail. So you'll notice we've got also communities in here. So flow screen components is a big one that was introduced a few years ago for you to drop your flow into. And you've got communities, authenticated and unauthenticated. So now we're able to put it on there for a guest user. Your community does need to be public for that to be visible. You can lock down pages on a page by page basis so that you don't actually have to expose like the home page or something to somebody if you want to use flow for guest users, but just keep that in mind um, as a kind of caveat there. And then at the bottom, we've got standard buttons. So you're able to actually override the standard new button or any of the other standard buttons with a Lightning component, and having your flow inside of that Lightning component now lets you put your flow in that scenario. So let's talk about the flow screen component of Lightning, because getting comfortable with this is one of the most beneficial things you can do for your flows, because screen real estate is precious on a Salesforce org, and you don't want to have your flows pop up when they're not adding any value. So make sure you're going to use some conditional visibility with your flows if you're dropping them onto a home page or to a record page. Just make sure that you think about when and where they're going to appear. In the utility bar, it's really easy to drop a flow in here now, but you need to make sure that you're passing in the record input variable correctly. It's case sensitive. It's a capital R, capital I, and it needs to be in the brackets with the exclamation point. So if you've done that, you can pass in the record that you're on and make your utility bar nice and dynamic. Actions as well. This is another area where Salesforce doesn't really document where your flow is. However, if you do a lowercase r with the record ID and a capitalized I, and you make sure that variable is available for input, then that flow will be receiving the ID from that record that the action is on. And this allows you to have a very nice interface for putting your flows on the page, where it's now they click a button and then the flow pops up. So actions are one of my favorite places. They also work great inside of mobile. So if you're trying to get your flows to be available for people in a mobile experience, the actions is a great way to do that. And as I mentioned, the standard buttons with the Lightning component. So it's just like the Visualforce page. This is from Salesforce's documentation. All you've got to do is change the name of the flow in line 4, and just change that from flow data to whatever flow name you have that you want to override that button with, and then that will call your flow and embed it inside the Lightning component. All right, so some of the out-of-the-box screen components that were added, we've got addresses, which is a big one because it is a annoying field that adding lots of fields to be a part of your page. This allows you to default it, brings in things like your state and country pick list into play. There's also dependent pick list, sliders, and toggles. So just tons of out-of-the-box enhancements that Salesforce has added. If you haven't played around with Visual Flow in a while, hopefully just seeing some of this that's out of the box gets you excited to go in and give it a shot. All right. So Salesforce Labs has this fantastic app called Flow Magic. I've got no idea why it was called Flow Magic. I think that it is pretty magical, but possibly a better name could have made this more readily available for people. But you'll see that I've got two different options on my screenshot here where I'm able to put images, and you can either reference them from a URL or a static resource, or use one of the ones that are part of Salesforce's design system, and have that match to pick list values that you've got on a record. So that way you can now make your flow visual and really just improve the overall look and feel of your flow. So it's about polishing up and just making it better. This one is a fun one that got added in. It is swipey, so allows your users to swipe yes or no to the pick list options. So it's just a kind of fun one. I've not really found a great use case for it, but it's a cool app that is out there. The service agent script, this goes back to kind of Flow's origin story in a sense of where service agent script is kind of why Flow was created originally before it was purchased by Salesforce. So there's a great app that will help this have it kind of pop up like that so that you can have the script inside of your flow. This one I found out about around Dreamforce last year. It just got released. It is the ability for you to put a dashboard inside of a flow. So now if you wanted to put a dashboard in a utility bar or on a different page that maybe the dashboard component wasn't available on, you can now embed dashboards inside of a flow and put them wherever you please. If you've got the scenario of needing to show a video or a file to people, you're now able to do that as well with the Flow Video Player and File Viewer component that you can add in. So you can either pull a YouTube video up for people, or you can pull up a PDF that might be attached to a record and prompt somebody to view it. And this is another new one. This came out last September. It allows you inside of a flow to select business hours and select how many hours you want your flow to grab that are business hours. So if you've got maybe a task and you want the task to be, let's say 16 hours after an opportunity is created, but you want that to be business hours, so it doesn't count on Saturday and Sunday. And it also needs to be 16 business hours, not just like all day Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You're able to use this business time app to actually hit some Apex classes that will grab the specific time of what 16 business hours would be based off the business hours that you submit. All right, so flow components, these are my favorite ones that I've found on unofficial SF. We've got the custom footer, which allows you to hide either the previous or next buttons, so that if you want to make it only show one, you can. But in addition to that, it allows you the ability to rename them, and you can rename them with variables or formulas so that you can make it dynamic. And it just provides a nice seamless way for you to say create record instead of next, because if your flow screen is not the very last page of your flow, it's always going to say next, which if somebody's already filled out all the information, it might not make a ton of sense for them to see the word next there. And you might want them to be able to see submit case instead. Dynamic question, rich text input and display, lookup. So Salesforce does have a lookup now that's standard that just came out. However, that lookup does not allow filters at this time. So if you want to have a lookup that you maybe put some conditional filters in, you definitely want to look at using the custom lookup. There's also a data table and a progress bar that you can utilize. And flow actions, we've got update screen. So if you need to force a refresh of the page, you are able to do that. You can show a toast, which is that little banner that is green or red, that can pop up for you. And you can navigate to a URL, an S object, or related list. They just came out with a new action that combines all of those into one specific action, as opposed to they used to be separate actions that you would install. There's also play sound and get rest data. So I've yet to do this, but play sound's one that is on my to-do list to have some fun with. We're able to put that wherever. So my thought is put it on a fault message, and you can play some sort of sound of maybe you yelling at your users, or a funny kind of sound that might be kind of inside joke at your company. So some cool options with that, and just more power for us without having to go code something. All right, so let's get into some demos. Before we get into the real demos, I'm going to jump over and just kind of show unofficial SF. So unofficial SF has a lot on it. Easiest way to navigate to the things that we're talking about here is just by hitting the flow button here. It's going to have beginner tutorials, how-to guides, blogs, documentations, videos, and demos. And the extend flow right there is what is most critical for y'all to go take a look at if you haven't been here. And screen components are all the components that I was talking about. If you click on here, you'll see there's way more than that, and there's the description with all of them. So make sure you take some time, go look at the screen components, go look at the actions. This is constantly being updated. If I sort by the date, you'll see we've got just, that date did not sort perfectly, but we've got things that were added very recently, like this get record type info was added less than a month ago. So make sure you're keeping a tab or keeping eyes on that website, just because it's got tons of great content for you to be able to use in your own org. All right, so we've got 3 demos we're going to go over today. For these 3 demos, we're going to be covering different things. The first one is called the claim case image button. So let's dive right on into that. All right, so I'm on a case here, and you'll notice I've got this big sign over here in the top right that says claim case, and that's because I'm not the owner of this case. Currently, if we go look at who the owner is under the details, you'll see that it is Astro who is the case owner. So if I want to claim this case, all I got to do is hit this image button, which is a flow. That claim case flow runs. I'm now the case owner. We've used a conditional page layout to hide that flow, and it is no longer showing. So what that looks like on the page is we're passing that record ID in, but you'll see I've got a field that just says display claim case flow equals true. And then I want to also validate that the record status is in new. So if the case has already been started, I don't want that button to appear for people that might be looking at somebody else's case. But if it's in the new status, then we're good on to letting that go. So you can customize that however you would want, maybe in your scenario, but for this one, you'll see that if I go and I switch the owner again um, from myself to Astro, that button will now appear because it's not in the new status, or it is in the new status, but if I move it out of the new status, let's say we move it to working, that button will no longer appear for me. So just based off the record context, we're able to hide and remove that. What does that button look like? So the first thing I do is I'm grabbing the case details. So I know what case I'm on, and then I've got my image button. There's only 3 things I really got to fill out here: the name, the static resource name, which is the image, and then our destination flow transition field, which I'm saying when this button's clicked, go next. So it's going to do what we normally consider the next button to be. And then if that happens, I set the owner ID in this assignment. So we grab our case, update the owner ID as the running user, and then we pass that case record into this record update. So it's a pretty straightforward flow. There's not a whole lot that's going on here, but by utilizing that component that's an image and letting that image button do the case claiming for them, it's a faster, more streamlined experience for them. So with that, let's do a quick recap. The main thing here is reducing clicks. So you saw when I went through and reassigned it back to Astro as the owner, I had a few clicks that I had to do. However, if I'm wanting to claim it, all I've got to do is hit that button and it takes everything else out of the picture. So it's just 1 click as opposed to 3 or 4. And those clicks add up over time. So it's always good to start reducing clicks where possible when you're trying to improve user adoption. And then context-aware flows. It's always good to be thinking about what that page looks like. You don't want to have things on it that aren't needed. So make sure that flow only appears when it's time for somebody to act. All right, so this is a fun one I really like. It's an automatic page redirection. So going back to my org over here, we've got an account, and on this account, Burlington Textiles, I've got an opportunity that we're expecting to close today. So as a salesperson, after I close this opportunity, we're going to create a project, and that project's going to be what our team goes and uses to do their work. Now, a lot of times we've seen flow scenarios where somebody will want, after a close one opportunity, either maybe the line items that are tied to that opportunity to go become assets on the account, or in this scenario that we're going to be going over, a project getting created so that the people that are implementing or installing the purchase solution will then go and work on that. So a lot of times we'll have automation that is when a closed one opportunity runs, and sometimes maybe the person who just closed it needs to go act on something that just happened. So what we're looking to do here is we're looking to have, when I move this to close one, for the project will get created, we've got a process builder that's doing that, but we want to have the person automatically get redirected to the project that was just created. So what we've done is we'll go select close one, and you'll see in the bottom of my screen here, there's just for a brief second a flow that opened up. And I was using a flow that is similar to the claim case flow, where we're putting a conditional flow onto our opportunity based off of the opportunity's data, and it will then redirect me to the project. So now I've got this project that I just created open. And if I go back to the opportunity, you'll notice that I didn't get redirected. Um, Now, I kept this on here just for example, but you would want to hide this in the scenario that it has finished. So the project redirect flow here, um, if I was to refresh my screen, you would not see it, but since I'm in a console view, it's still there. And this flow is just doing a flow action of navigating to that record that was updated. So we're passing in on our opportunity details. It's not on the page, but we're passing in the project. And then from that project, we're using that to redirect to that project record. So if I do a quick refresh of this, you'll notice now that that flow is no longer at the bottom of the page because it doesn't meet the criteria of our record. So if you're not in a console view, you wouldn't have seen it after it ran once. But as I look at this flow redirect, you'll see that I've got a project redirect field. So when that project redirect equals false, we want this to appear, but also we need a project name. So if the opportunity doesn't have a project associated to it, we don't want this to try to run either. So what that looks like inside of Flow is pretty simple as well. We don't have a whole lot going on here, but the first thing we're doing is getting the opportunity. So we pass in the opportunity ID from the screen, and I'm grabbing the project and project redirect fields. This is just a checkbox, that's just a lookup, and then I'm using that for my go-to action, go-to project action. And all I do is pass in the project ID, which is from the opportunity. And this action will do the update after you've already gone through your record redirect. So I don't have to do the set opportunity and update opportunity before the action happens. I can do those after because the flow will still process even though the user's context has actually left the flow, which is important to know because you can actually store output values in these. So if you needed to reference anything, you could. But in the set opportunity values here, all I'm doing is marking this project redirect field as true and then updating the opportunity here. And that will now allow me to not have my opportunity have that flow appear anymore. So it only appeared when the opportunity was first closed won. So the rest of the automation is happening in a process builder. If we have questions at the end and some time, potentially we can go look at that, but this is more focused on flow. So going to be moving on now to our third and final demo, but first let's do a quick recap. So once again, reduce the clicks. Do you get the theme? Guide your users. So don't leave anything up for grabs with them, throw them at the page that you want them to have. Don't put up the guardrails and make sure they're going down the path you want. Don't just assume that they're going to go down that golden path that you expect them to go down. And reduce errors where possible. So potentially maybe somebody could go to a different screen or like you could have left the flow on the component or on the opportunity page and it just constantly redirects people and they can't go to the opportunity anymore because that flow is always appearing and is now gonna, the second somebody loads an opportunity, they're gonna be redirected to that project. So you just wanna make sure that you're reducing errors as you build that out. All right, so now we've got the override new button. And this override new button, we've got a few things here. So the first is you just got to create a lightning component and then this all, you can find this all documented on Salesforce. I've actually got the record redirect happening in this code that I copied in. However, all you really need is the start flow to be updated with your flow name. And this is the API name. So I've got one called new opportunity guide. And as I go to my opportunity, we've saved that lightning component. If you're gonna override a standard button, you need to go to that standard button, hit edit, and then you can choose what kind of override you want to have. So in my scenario, all I wanted to do was override the Lightning experience for this demo. But if I was truly doing this, I probably would also want to make sure I override the mobile experience too. Um, and then Salesforce Classic, hopefully you're not using that anymore. But if you are, you can do that with a Visual Force page. So you'd have to set something else up for Classic. But really easy to change your standard buttons. You just have to have that Lightning component to do so with. And then our new opportunity guide. This is a very basic example, just trying to give you all some ideas of things that you can do to take your flows to the next level. So all I'm doing is passing in the name, the close date, and the type, because maybe we've got tons of fields on this object that we don't want to have people fill out on the record creation, but they need to have them once they're on the actual details of the page. I hear this time and time again of like, I need a different page layout for creation than I do for the actual record detail. And if you've got multiple record types, sometimes that means you might need to add like 5, 6, 7 additional record types just for the create new, and then have automation that redirects the record type to the correct one after it's been created, which is doable. It's a lot of overhead, and ideally something that maybe doing a flow scenario like this can look to avoid for you. So we've got our fields there. I then go set my fields in this record variable assignment here, where I'm passing in an account ID. For this, I'm just keeping it static for the demo, but you would want to put the account as an input or go look up an account based off of context, and then passing in the values there and defaulting all the stages to prospecting. And then we go update our opportunity, or sorry, create it, and then our Lightning component will redirect us to that opportunity page. So if all goes well, we'll navigate back to our account page, and this should work. And we shouldn't have the full experience that we had with like a typical record created. So I'm now on the account. We're going to go to our opportunities, hit new. And this is an unstyled component here, but so you'll see that the next button's down there. But I can just say automation hour, hit next, and that's what we get for a live demo here. You'll see that it was created, the redirect. I'll need to go debug, but we've got our new opportunity in here. And if I wanted to, let's say, move it to closed one, we can see that demo number 2 in action one more time, and that project that gets created. So hopefully you can see how some of that can come together to really create a good experience for your users and streamline your overall processes. Once again, reduce your clicks and make just a better experience for your users. Work to simplify the process. So if you don't need to have all the information for them to create an opportunity, maybe a case or a custom object in their business process, then look to simplify it. If a global action or something similar to that doesn't work, maybe this flow override will work for you. And just do what you need to increase adoption of your users. If salespeople are having too many fields to fill out on an opportunity, they're more likely to not put all their deals into the pipeline. Some other types of user groups are not as able to keep that out, like service people typically don't have the ability to leave tickets not in Salesforce, but salespeople, you want to make sure you're making it a good experience for them. All right, so what is coming next? Now, this is just my ideas. I don't know timeline or if this will actually happen, but I'm hopeful, and I think it will. First thing is global actions. So ideally, a global action, you're going to be able to just drop a flow in like a regular action would, and then overriding the standard button without code. So just what I showed you there with that Lightning component, ideally, you don't have to do that at all with a Lightning component, and you can just select a flow as your option. So we'll see if that comes true. And then let's talk about some best practices. So these are the high level of the best practices we're going to go over. Input and output variables. This one has changed since I first started learning Flow. When I first started learning and we were doing that URL button that I showed you on that first slide, it was very difficult to know what variables you might need or not need in Flow, and there just wasn't Trailhead at all out there. So like you were kind of on your own to figure things out. So I always would put the um, input and output variables as true for both. And I'm sure if I went back to some of those old flows now, they would look terrible trying to put them into a process builder or a lightning page where all of your input variables are visible. Um, so now you can clearly see which ones need to be input and output as you're inside the system. So take a deep breath, keep it clean. Don't put in 50 variables, because if you have that, it's going to be really confusing which ones people need to actually fill out for your flow to function properly. Because you might know, but let's say you switch companies and now whoever's that admin taking over your role, they don't know if all those variables are supposed to be filled out or not if they're trying to reuse your stuff. And also make sure you standardize your variable naming conventions. I know there's plenty of different patterns that people like to do. Just make sure you pick one of them and stick to it in your org. It's very confusing if you have multiple different naming conventions inside one org. As long as there's some consistency within an org, that's the biggest thing. And a lot of people have different preferences, so just make sure you're consistent there. And to touch on that a little bit more, Flow and Process Builder, if you're deploying, it isn't very clear. The metadata, it all lives inside one piece of metadata because Process Builder is actually built on Flow. So because of that, just make sure that you are very clear in the naming of your actual flow and process builders. I like to do this as my kind of naming convention is just the object name, the purpose, and the type. So my example is the opportunity. We have a sales guide, and then it is a screen flow. That lets me know as I'm going to deploy whether it's a screen flow, an auto-launched flow, a process builder. It just keeps everything a little bit cleaner for me so that I know I'm actually selecting the right flow to go pass into production as opposed to a flow that maybe is still in development. And once again, just like the variables, you can pick your own naming convention. Just make sure that you follow that throughout all of your flows and process builders, because it will just help everybody that you might be working with inside your org to be on the same page. And then if you noticed inside of my flows today that I demoed, I used record variables or S-object variables instead of selecting text variables and then doing a record update with those text variables or record create with those text variables. So the record variables used to be really complex inside the old flow builder, but now with the new flow builder, they're super easy to understand and use. And by default, they're actually going to be what Salesforce throws out there for you. It's just going to be called the name of your component. So like if you call it get opportunity, your record variable is going to be called get opportunity. So just keep that in mind. I like to go the advanced route and create my own record variables and just call it opportunity or lead or contact, whatever that object I'm working on is, because it makes it way easier to understand and organizes my flow so much better. And then conditional updates. So this is something I didn't cover in demos at all, but one of the great things about using a record variable is you can conditionally update portions of that variable through decisions and assignments inside of your flow. So if you've got a few updates that you want to make to an object, but you've got kind of some complex logic where it's a lot of if statements to determine whether or not you need to update certain fields, you can do that with a record variable and assignments so that you only update the fields that you need to. It can get a little bit more taxing from like a element perspective in your flow. However, it's going to be easier on the system. So this is really good if you're doing like process builder to try to reduce the amount of record updates or creates in that transaction. And if you do it conditionally with an assignment and some decisions to do some of that logic instead of separate record updates on each one, things will run a lot more efficiently for you. and you'll hopefully stay further away from limits. All right, so loops. Everyone loves loops, but where possible, don't use record events inside of loops. It's okay if you have to. There's certain scenarios where it's not going to be that big of a deal. Make sure you're counting the iterations inside your loop and then know the data volume. So the first and third one here really kind of go together. Knowing the data volume, if I know that I've only got 20 records max for an object that I'm going to be looping through, then I don't really need to worry about putting record events inside of a loop that would hit my limits, because we've got plenty of room to spare. But if I know I've got 400 records that I'm looping through, now I know I can't do that. So just think about that as you are working with loops. They're really fun once you get the hang of them, but you just got to be careful. And then decisions. Decisions are probably my favorite thing inside of Flow, because you're able to just be very specific. You don't want to have lots of assumptions of what people will do. You want to make sure that your flow is doing exactly what you want through all the different potential inputs that somebody might have with it. So decisions will let you to check the variables that people have inserted into your flow, or context for the related objects to that flow, and then do things specifically based off of that. So make sure you're utilizing decisions to create a good streamlined approach for your users, and also avoid potential fault errors by having your flow break. I prefer that you pick either, or I like to pick questions or statements as I name my decisions. Try to keep it in a consistent fashion, just like the naming convention, but pick questions or statements when you're putting a decision. That way somebody can easily read what that decision is being used for. And then faults. So fault messages are something that I know I get in the habit sometimes of not putting there, because if you're doing a lot of auto launched flows, you can't put a fault message in there because they're being triggered by process builder. So a lot of us have the tendency of forgetting that it's there if you're doing more so auto launched as opposed to screen flows. But if you've got screen flows in the mix, definitely look to present an appropriate alert with the fault message. So put in some additional information like, hey, your admin team has been notified. If you know exactly what the fault message is going to be, like let's say that you're potentially like doing maybe a lead conversion and you want the flow to automatically convert the lead, but you know that potentially the duplicate rules might come into play in a few edge cases. So you put in a decision from your fault that sends somebody maybe to a different screen that says, hey, we think we found a duplicate. Can you go check to make sure there's no matches before converting this? As opposed to showing them the duplicates detected error message. So you can use a decision to customize that fault message display and determine whether or not you actually want to show the fault message, because you can kind of determine what it is through the decision. And then another big thing is give the user a chance to resolve it. So I would say a lot of times it's something like duplicate record, or maybe they typed in a field incorrectly. Anything like that that's preventable, that doesn't, it's more of like user error or data error as opposed to the admin built the flow incorrectly. If you show those records, or sorry, if you show the fault message, then the user's most likely going to be able to solve that problem for themselves and not actually need to get support. And then make sure you set up the appropriate error alert. Not sure if everybody is aware, but recently in the automation settings, you can now set up the Apex emails to also go with your fault messages. So you can be the person who last like modified or saved the flow or process builder, or you can use the Apex emails and you can have it be a distribution list that is your admin team or all the people that might need to be aware of that flow error, so that it's not just one person getting that email anymore. And last one, make it pretty. So be precise with the layout. Think about the maintenance. Don't just throw things onto your page. Just take a step back, breathe, think through what you're doing, think through what the long-term outlook is of it, and be proud of the work you're doing by polishing it up a little bit before deploying it to production. So um, with that, thank you everybody for attending today's automation hour. We're now going to open up for questions.
All right, so if you have any questions, use the questions feature within GoToWebinar. Michelle had a question. I thought the reserved variable was record ID small r, capital I, and I think that was on your Lightning record
Yeah,
page.
if you notice when, and I'll go to like the page layout where the flow is being passed in, there's really two. So it depends how you're actually passing the variable in. Oop, I'm on the project, not the opportunity. We'll just go to the case. So if I'm doing it from a record page, or I think what I was probably showing was the utility bar, you'll notice that it is a capital R here that it's passing in, and the capital I. That's different from what it's actually like doing when you're talking about an action where it is the lowercase r with a capital I, all one word. So there's two different places, which is another reason why it's a little confusing. Um, I don't know why it's different there. I didn't put it in here, but this week I recently um, was doing a list view, and if you do a button click, like a multi checkbox list button, the flow will actually take into an undocumented variable called IDS, all lowercase, and that's a collection variable that you just need to populate, and then you can work from a list view with whatever records are selected without any code.
Great. So just a reminder to folks, we will be posting the link to the recording as well as the deck out on our YouTube channel, Automation Hour, as well as our website and our Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour. Sarah has a question. Hold on, just lost my place. Okay, Sarah's question is, when you are creating a single record without conditions, does using an assignment element and S-object variable still make more sense than just using the create record element and specifying the values with variables and literals?
So you can definitely do that, and I did one with the variables or literals this week for a scenario. So it depends, like kind of scenario by scenario. I'm a fan of using the record ones because if you notice, that's where Salesforce is pushing us. Like that's the default when I go add a get records here, and I call it get account, and then we go look for our account object. You'll see that how many records to store, only the first record. And then in the new spring release that's coming out, Jen, I don't have my pre-release org open, but there's also a few more features that are added here that's like bring the whole record and then select any that are used, I think. So this is where they're going, is to use more of these record variables as opposed to the static. And if I do that, you'll notice now in my manager, I've got account from get account. So that record single variable was automatically created. So it's definitely in some scenarios a little bit more effort to do the work. Um, However, it's kind of the new best practice, or at least that's what I'm kind of reading between the lines on, is that it's definitely where we're being pushed to go. And I really do like how easy it is to utilize, because as I go, let's say select values here, and I go select account, I've got all the fields here organized so that if I've got like 7 fields that maybe I'm setting, I don't have to have 7 variables that I manually create once. each, I only have to create this one record variable once, and then I can go grab any of the other ones.
All right, next question is from Bucky. We're a ISV partner with a list view button. We have to add the RET URL to return to the same list view. The problem is the A01 is hard-coded and we can't edit at our customers, so we have to create a new button and change the object three-letter ID. Any ideas on how to make this better?
I think I'm understanding that question, Bucky. I would look at using the new navigate action that's inside of the unofficial SF. My component, I'm on actions. Of course, I sorted it differently than I'm used to, so give me a second. Navigate everywhere that just came out. And this has a list view as an option, so you can do the object homepage. And I know we've got Eric on the webinar, and I'm sure if we unmuted him, I'm sure he could give us a little bit more context here on exactly how it's set up. But my understanding would be that when you are doing the object, you just would put the object name, or like this scenario, my object double_C. So I would look to use this, and I think if you're already got everything else going with your button correctly, if you put this flow action at the end that will do the redirect, then you should be good to go.
All right. Bucky says thanks. So we're going to give another couple of seconds for anybody else who might have a question as it relates to David's presentation or a general process automation question. Anyone feverishly typing away? Oh, got one. Jay asks, any other clever ways besides a field on an object to control conditional displays?
Do you have any off the top of your head?
Um,
So device is kind of handy if you do have desktop or phone where you're making conditional, but for really getting advanced, I think you've got to just try to figure out permissions maybe. Like that's one option that's pretty cool. But the record, that's really where you're going to be able to get the most out of it. So like just grabbing a formula field is probably the thing that I've seen myself use the most. Anything from your side, Jen?
no, I think you covered it. All right, last call for questions. All right, Jennifer, not myself, asks, any recommendations on using the cross-object formulas that Salesforce has recently added? We use a lot of loops and lookups, but updating all our old flows seems tricky.
So I've played around a little bit with that new feature. Well, actually, I think it wasn't necessarily a new feature as much as just finally documented as a feature to do the statements. And I know half the times I've had it work, and half the other times I've hit some flow errors. Um, so I'm not experienced enough on it yet to give too many tips, but that's one of the areas I'm looking to brush up a little bit on over the next month or so. Do you have much experience with it, Jen?
Not really played around. with it too much. Okay, anybody else? All right, so I don't see any more questions, David.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody, and join us on the 28th when Rakesh comes back to present, our other co-host, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.